In this fourth and last interview with Robyn Fivush and Marshall Duke, professors of psychology at Emory University, they explore the concepts of ascending and descending family storylines and their relevance for families today as they face the pandemic. They also emphasize the importance of family rituals that create symbolic containers for the cyclical nature of life. So let's get to it. In your writings, you talk about ascending, descending, and oscillating stories. Could you say a little more about that and how what are the distinctions of those kinds of stories and why each is valuable or important for children to hear?
I guess I brought that into the conversation, Robyn, so I'll talk about it. This really comes from a sociologist, an Israeli sociologist by the name of Zerubbabel. But he talked about the shape of family memory, the shape of family narratives. And he described various forms. Ascending mean as a story that sort of says, we came here with nothing and we worked very hard and our family rose. It's an ascending family narrative. A descending family narrative would be one where before the Depression hit in 1929 or in 1980 or 2008, we were doing okay, but then we had these troubles and there was a descent. But it turns out that when we first started looking at the stories, people told positive stories. They sort of avoided telling the bad things about what happened in the family. And we were kind of surprised to find that some of the more well-adjusted families told negative things as well. I don't know if you remember, Robyn, we turned on a tape of a family. We had asked the families to tell stories for us about the family. And one began with, let's talk about when Uncle Billy was murdered. Do you remember that? We said, what? It turned out it was an okay family. Because what happens is that the oscillation is really much more realistic. It is the way family life is, the way life is. And a full family story has both ups and downs. But the fact that there are downs followed by ups is a lesson in resilience. Because essentially the story also includes how we came back from that low point. So the oscillating family narrative is really a narrative of resilience. It's a narrative of rising up in the face of some sort of adversity, but also providing us with the awareness that everything's not going to be good all the time, that there are going to be down times.
I think that's a really critical point right now as families are facing the pandemic. I also think that what's important about the oscillating story is that sometimes bad things happen and they don't necessarily bring good things. You just put them behind you and then other things, good things happen. Right? So it's not necessary that everything that happens ends up for the best, for the good, with a silver lining.
Good point.
Sometimes bad things happen. They're bad. We get through it. And then we come together as a family and we have new times, better times. So it's not always a question that you have to always find the silver lining in this event. And that's where the family story really helps, because it's not just my story or this story of this time. It's a family over long periods of time that we persevere, that we face hard things, we face challenges. Some things we actually overcome and good comes out of it. Other things we just face and they're just hard, but we're together and we face them together. And we move on.
Mm-hmm. You speak a little bit about rituals and family rituals, and I think you alluded to it earlier in terms of exploring a wider history. Say a little bit about the importance of ritual in family life and also for children's resilience and self-esteem. Any things that you've discovered in your work?
The center at Emory, the Sloan Center there, was called the Emory Center for the Study of Myth and Ritual in American Life. And so we focused on myth, narrative, stories, but also on ritual. And I think that it's, at least it's been my experience, and I've been very big on ritual long before I began looking at the narratives, because ritual is a touchstone. It's a stabilizing influence in a time of upheaval, turmoil. That gathering together for a family event is a ritual. Annual Thanksgiving dinner or a Christmas gathering or anything like that, a birthday. It gives the everybody involved an opportunity to stop for a moment and to do the same thing that we've always done. And the more same it is, the stronger the effect of this touchstone in the midst of chaos. And so we found people, even in the pandemic, many people, in the face of all the advice coming to us about don't travel, still felt that they needed to get home for Christmas or to have a Thanksgiving. It turned out to cost us and cost many of them, but this ritual was so important, it overpowered actually the reality of the pandemic. So we need these kinds of things. And rituals serve the purpose of stabilizing us. And as such, they fit in with the goal of the project that we did at Emory, and that is what keeps families together. And certainly ritual is one of those things. It keeps communities together. It keeps nations together.
Yeah, you think about like Friday night football game in some town.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that of course we go to see the high school play Friday night.
We see the high school play Friday night. Yes, and apparently there was a Wednesday night football game or something this year, and people said, "Well, we don't play football on Wednesday night. It's not what we do.
Our sense of
It's not what we do. No, you see, it's not what we do." So yeah, the rituals are important, and every family has rituals. Sometimes they're created rituals, sometimes they're adapted rituals. We studied families at Thanksgiving one year down at Hilton Head Island, where ritualistically my family has gone every year except this past year. And we asked people just at random, what's your Thanksgiving ritual? And this group of people, parents and grandparents and children, stood there and said, with tears in their eyes, about the ritual of the Thanksgiving tuna that they had every year. For they can't imagine when it began, but they have its Thanksgiving tuna. And their emotional connection to the Thanksgiving tuna was just as strong as anybody else's connection to the Thanksgiving turkey. But they just talked about it and what grandma made with the tuna. Ritual is a good thing. And it's one of the health-giving things that we have. And they become part of family narratives. They become family stories.
Yeah. In my family, at Thanksgiving, because it kind of rotates around either in Florida or in Atlanta, because I have nephews here and niece in New York. But there's a ritual that after, when the kids were, both my nephew and niece each had 3 girls. And after the voluminous desserts and the food was beyond anything, the ritual was to get a can of whipped cream, and the girls would all lie on the floor. And their dad would come around and fill their mouths with whipped cream until it was flowing out. And this became you had to have that happen, and it was everyone had a great laugh. But
and that'll happen when they grow up and have their own.
I'm sure they'll do it with their kids as well. Of course,
right.
How can you have Thanksgiving without doing that crazy thing?
I think rituals also bring out that family stories are both linear across time, but they're also cyclical.
Mm.
So rituals are powerful because they're predictable. Thanksgiving, Christmas or Hanukkah, Passover or Easter, whatever, or maybe even, the annual family vacation to the beach where you always go to the same cottage. They're predictable, and they give, as Marsha was saying, they give a sense of stability. They certainly provide their own sense of story, what we do at Thanksgiving, what we do at the beach, as well as remember that one Thanksgiving that we invited the neighbors and they disrupted our dinner. And, so you have both the ritual story and you also have the individual episodic stories that happen during one particularly memorable time of that ritual. But I think that that's the other power of family stories. It's not just it happened in the past. It's happening again and again and again. Stories are not just about what happened to people in the past. They're very much about how do we face the future. And rituals really help us face the future.
I've got one last question for you both, and just thinking down the road, I think Robyn, you and I spoke. It's been well over a year, a couple years ago. I was doing some work with a school district in North Carolina, and it was a town where about a third of the children in school there were first generation Americans. Their parents were immigrants, mostly from Latin America. And then there were a large percentage of the town, about a third of the town, were African Americans, and then the other third were Caucasian, and it was a poor town, generally speaking. I mean, most of the kids there were all the schools were Title One, and we began asking the question, especially for the Hispanic parents, they couldn't help their kids with their homework because they didn't know English very well, and the question is, what could they give their children? And I'm thinking about how do we begin to design interventions that we can basically stimulate the idea of family sharing? Have you given some thought to that, and what would that look like?
If you talk to most creative teachers in schools, elementary schools, high schools, I think that they're aware of the importance of creating things that produce a sense of connectedness to family, to community. And I'm pleased and surprised sometimes, but surprised less and less when I talk to teachers or parent groups who are saying, "Oh yeah, well, they're making books now, notebooks and pictures and objects and gathering things together, and there are all sorts of curricula being developed to help and guide kids in actually finding out as much as they possibly can about their family stories and putting it into some physical form that they then literally and figuratively can carry with them." And I think that this is a wonderful thing. There is more and more of an awareness of it that I see in lots of places where you wouldn't expect it. And we've been watching a lot of these programs online now, which are dealing with how are we helping the kids at home, what's happening there, and people are trying to create some narrative about this. And as Robyn says, it's now. But I think people are much more aware that transmitting a family story is a really good thing to do. And it doesn't have to be, as Robyn said, doesn't have to be, nor should it be a forced, like, okay, now it's story time, I'm going to sit down and tell it to you. Stories just pop up as needed. And people are not even thinking about a story, and something is said at a table, or a child makes a comment, or there's a TV show, and suddenly says, that reminds me of a story. Magic words. That reminds me of a story. And then, as Robyn says, when the eyes roll, when grandma or mom and dad say that, for me, that's always proof that they've succeeded in transmitting the story, because the kids know what's coming. And that's a great sign.
I do think that there are more and more organizations that are working to integrate storytelling into the curriculum, both in K through 12 and also in higher education. There's more research on this, and there are now a lot of websites. And let me just say, the websites that provide free resources for things like, how to tell a family story. Here are some tools. Here are some strategies. Here are tips. Here are ways that you might go about doing this. And one organization if I can give a little bit of a plug, it's a non-for-profit that I've been working with recently, Narrative 4, which is writing high school curriculum around using stories, family stories, to build empathy across what we know are very divided ways of seeing the world right now. So I think that the idea of stories is very timely right now. I think all the work that you've been doing, Rick, has bringing stories into the school systems, into the healthcare system. I think we're seeing it everywhere. People are really beginning to understand that stories are the way in which human beings understand each other. And they're a powerful tool, not just to understand who we are or who our family is, but also for me to understand who you are and who your family is, and to bridge those divides. So I think it's wonderful that stories are being brought into all of these different kinds of institutions in very powerful ways to create those connections and build those bridges.
Well, that's a great note to end on. I want to thank both of you for taking this hour to share with me, and I think that the audience is going to really benefit from hearing about your experiences working with story over the last 20, 30 years. So thanks again, Robyn and Marshall, for being on Explorations.
Thanks.
Thank
you, Rick. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. Thanks again, Marshall.
Thank you. Be well.
Bye-bye.